If one day, the person you love most tells you, "I can't live without you," would you believe it? Holly Anna Carter did. She believed it so deeply that she lost herself in that love. Until one rainy morning in Seattle, she quietly placed her wedding ring on the counter, let the key fall onto the stone floor, and walked away without looking back. This isn't just a story about a broken marriage. It's a woman's journey through love, betrayal, heartbreak, and the long road back to herself until the world had no choice but to listen. This is If Your Heart Is Real, a story of letting go, of pride, and of a love that saved them both, by ending. Spring sunlight in Seattle has its own way of showing up, thin as a promise, warm enough to make you believe winter is finally gone. That morning, inside the Volunteer Park Conservatory, orchids bloomed in soft ribbons of color. The damp smell of soil mingled with light and mist, making the air feel alive. In the middle of it all, Holly Anna Carter bent over her camera, taking close-up shots, eyes focused, hands adjusting the lens, as if afraid to break something fragile. She was a freelance photographer. The job didn't make her bank account grow but made her feel alive. Whenever her lens captured a petal or a dewdrop, Holly felt like she was touching the warmth of her grandmother, who told her, "Some things don't need money to be precious. You have to see them truly." She didn't know that a man had been standing a few steps away, watching her for 10 minutes. John Baker's sleeves rolled up. Tie loosened the look of a man too busy but trying to escape his workday. He had only stopped by to clear his head. After all, his company, Baker Technologies, had just closed a deal that made the papers call him the rightful heir to Seattle's financial empire. But when he saw the woman crouching among the orchids, something inside him went still. It wasn't because she was stunning, though she was, but because the calm around her silenced all the noise in his head. He walked past her 3 times, pretending to look at flowers, before finally gathering the courage to stop. "Do you come with the flowers?" he blurted out with a half-awkward smile. "Or do I have to pay extra for you?" Holly looked up, surprised. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the worst pickup line I've ever heard here." John flushed. "I know." I panicked. "Can I try again?" She smiled softly, half forgiving, half challenging. "You get one more chance." He took a breath, then said slowly, "I've been walking around this greenhouse for 20 minutes, trying to find something clever to say, but then I realized, I just wanted to know what you see through that lens that makes you smile like that." This time, Holly didn't answer right away. She looked at him really, looked wondering if she should let this man step into her world. Finally, she said quietly, "Better." From that moment, their conversation never seemed to end, flowing from orchids to light, from work to what kept them believing in people. They left the conservatory when the sun was already tilting west. John asked to buy her coffee. She agreed on one condition: no more pickup lines. They sat at Pike Street Diner, a small place with old wooden tables and chipped ceramic mugs. Neither talked much about work. He told her about a childhood shadowed by the pressure to succeed, about a father who always said, "A baker doesn't get to be weak." She told him about her grandmother in Portland, who raised her on simple meals and the belief that kindness is a kind of strength. They found a fragile but real connection between unrelated stories. Both were tired of pretending to be fine. When John walked her home to her small apartment in Fremont, he stopped at the door and asked, "Do you believe in destiny?" Holly smiled. "I believe in moments when we're brave enough to stop and see something. Maybe that's destiny." He looked at her for a long time. "Then today, I stopped at the right moment." The door closed, and from that day on, Seattle felt a little less cold. In the following weeks, John found every reason to be around her. One afternoon, he showed up at her studio to bring her hot coffee. Another day, he sent a bouquet of white orchids with a note, "For the one who knows how to make flowers bloom with her eyes." She didn't want to accept it, but smiled every time she remembered the line. Gradually, they became a habit. He told her, "I love the way you see the world. It makes me believe there's still good in it." She replied, "And I love the way you listen. Not to respond, but to understand." One Thursday night, in her small kitchen, they cooked pasta together. John was so clumsy with the bell peppers that the knife nearly slipped. Holly laughed. "If you ever become a chef, your restaurant's doomed." He set the knife down, looked at her, his eyes suddenly serious. "Then I'll change careers, be your husband instead. How about that?" Holly froze. "What are you saying? I know this isn't the perfect proposal, no ring, no candles. But right now, I've never been more sure that I want to wake up next to you every morning." She looked at him, the man, both awkward and impossibly sincere. Tears came before she could nod, and in the scent of sizzling garlic, they held each other in that small kitchen, starting a chapter they both believed would last forever. The wedding was simple. By Lake Washington, just a few close friends and family. John's father shook her head, his stern eyes softening when she said, "You raised a man who knows how to love with respect. I'll treasure that." The old man nodded, replying quietly, "Then keep it safe when he forgets how." Holly lived as if she'd finally found the right kind of love in the first months of marriage. John woke early, made her coffee, and often pulled her to the balcony to watch the sunrise. "I love how the morning light hits your face," he'd say. "It makes me feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled, snapping a picture that would later become the symbol of their brief peace. They had a small ritual. Every Thursday night, no matter how busy work got, they'd turn off their phones, cook dinner, and play music. "Why Thursday?" he once asked. "Because Thursday is the most exhausting day of the week, when people forget what matters. And I don't want us to forget each other." Everything seemed perfect. Their love wasn't loud, but deep. At parties, Holly was always the center, not because of her looks, but because she made people feel seen. She spoke to elders with respect, to servers with warmth. John watched from afar, feeling like he was witnessing magic. He once told her, "You make every room brighter when you walk in." She replied, "No, I just see other people's light before they see it themselves." But happiness can be like crystal, so beautiful that a single crack is enough to make it fall apart. And that crack came quietly, without warning. John began taking longer business trips. The texts grew shorter. Dinner became something she ate alone, under a soft light. Still, she stayed patient, believing marriage takes time to adjust. She slipped a note into his jacket pocket. "Don't forget to breathe. I'm still here." He never mentioned it, but she found the note folded neatly in his wallet one morning. She smiled, believing things were fine. One rainy afternoon, they walked around the lake. John suddenly stopped. "Holly, do you ever worry that we're living in a bubble? Something that seems solid, but could burst at one touch?" She looked at him, her voice gentle. "I don't fear breaking. I only fear the day we stop trying to hold it together." He said nothing. Her answer comforted him but also scared him, because somewhere inside, he had already begun to stop trying. That night, he talked in his sleep. She woke up and heard him whisper a name she didn't know. She told herself it was just a colleague, but her heart stung anyway. And from that moment, their happiness began its countdown. The next morning, John left early for work without the usual goodbye kiss. Holly stood by the window watching him go, a quiet knowing settling in her chest. Every beautiful story has a chapter its characters don't want to read, but fate still makes them turn the page. She took a deep breath, went back to her camera, trying to focus again. But through the lens, the flowers looked sadder than usual. Outside, Seattle was still raining its steady, endless kind of rain, as if the sky was mourning something it couldn't name. October in Seattle carries a cold that slips quietly beneath your clothes. The wind isn't harsh, the rain isn't heavy, but the chill lingers, making people talk to each other less. Holly noticed it first, not with her mind, but through the silence that filled a house once full of laughter. John had been coming home later. The dinners she made turned cold, long before he walked through the door. At first, she stayed patient waiting, reheating the food, smiling, asking softly, "Rough day?" He'd answer, "Yeah, fine," without looking up from his phone. Their conversations, if they happened at all, hovered around work, events, stocks, the kind of talk that filled time but not hearts. The little things that once made them happy, his clumsy hands covered in pasta dough, or the way she caught a raindrop on his hair through her lens, had vanished. Holly brought John lunch at his office one evening, hoping to surprise him. His young woman secretary looked at her with sympathy and unease. "Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Baker's in a meeting. With clients. Outside." The hesitation was enough. Holly understood. She smiled anyway, set the lunchbox down, and quietly left. On the way home, she stopped at a red light as the rain began to pour harder. She wondered, when did love turn into guessing where her husband was, and with whom, instead of simply trusting that he still loved her? That night, she lay beside him but didn't sleep. The clock in the living room ticked coldly through the silence. John's back was turned to her, as if an invisible wall between them had grown too thick to see through. The next morning, he left early. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Meeting in Portland. Back Friday. Don't wait up." That was all. She stared at the paper, unsure whether to feel sad or relieved. Sometimes what hurts most isn't a fight. It's when the other person no longer feels the need to explain. She pulled out their wedding photos. In one, he was laughing. She was looking at him with the eyes of someone who believed love could last forever. Now, that smile looked like a stranger's. She felt like she was looking at two people who no longer existed. Thursday night, she still cooked dinner out of habit. Spaghetti, red wine, candles. They used to call these things their happiness ritual, but the table held only one plate. She turned on the warm light, played soft music, lifted a forkful of pasta, and forced it past the dryness in her throat. Outside, the Seattle wind howled through the window, like someone whispering truth she didn't want to hear. When her phone buzzed, she reached for it quickly. A message. "Sorry, still out with clients. No name, no promise, just coldness." She typed back, "Have you eaten?" But the message was never read. That night, she didn't cry. She sat still, watching the candle burn down to nothing, the smoke rising like a final breath. The next day, she stopped by his office, saying she had charity papers to drop off. The new assistant, Vanessa Cole, opened the door, her tone too familiar. "Oh, Mrs. Baker, John just stepped out, but you can leave it with me." The woman had a sharp smile and eyes that were too confident for an assistant. Holly placed the folder on the desk and said quietly, "That's all right. I won't stay." As she turned to leave, she heard laughter from the glass-walled conference room, a woman's laugh, and a deep male voice she knew by heart. She walked down the long hallway, each step feeling like it pressed into her own heart. The old security guard greeted her. "You okay, Mrs. Baker?" She smiled faintly. "Just a little lost, that's all." After that, everything moved slowly, like a song playing off-beat. She kept trying to hold on to the small things waiting for him, cooking, leaving notes filled with quiet affection. But John barely responded. One night, he came home late, and she smelled an unfamiliar perfume on his shirt. She looked up, didn't accuse, only asked, "Did you eat?" "Yeah, I did," he said flatly. "Don't look at me like that, Holly. I'm tired." "So am I, John. But I still cook. I still wait. I never asked you to." The words were light as air, but they cut like glass. After that, things began to split apart, two rails running in the same direction, never touching again. He had his own schedule, his own friends, his own parties, ones she was no longer invited to. Once, she asked, "Can I come with you?" He half smiled, half sneered. "It's a partner's event, not a place to discuss flowers and photography." That sentence haunted her all night. She had thought he loved her because of her simplicity. Now it seemed those same things embarrassed him. Holly tried one last time. She set the table beautifully, candles, flowers, the song they had danced to on their wedding day. 8 o'clock passed, then 9, then 10. He still hadn't come home. She called. He didn't answer. Near midnight, he finally walked in, the smell of alcohol mixing with the sound of rain outside. "Where were you?" "Company party." "You didn't see my texts." "Do I need to report everything to you?" "No. I just waited." "Then stop waiting, Holly. It's exhausting for both of us." She stood still, fists trembling. Her voice cracked. "Do you still love me?" He was silent. A second, two. Then quietly, "I don't know." That night, she stepped out onto the porch. The rain hit her face, icy and sharp. She remembered her grandmother's words. If someone no longer looks at you like they used to, don't beg them to. Turn around and look at yourself. The next morning, Holly drove to see her father-in-law, William Baker. He welcomed her with his usual calm, poured her a cup of black tea. "I think he's lost," she said softly. "I just want to know if there's anything I can do." He looked out the window and sighed. The boy was taught to win, not to love. "You can't fix what his father broke. But if I leave, you'll hate me." "No, Holly, I'll hate myself for not teaching him enough to keep you." Holly left the Baker estate that day feeling hollow. She drove aimlessly until she reached the lake where they'd taken their wedding photos. The sky was grey, the water restless. She sat on a cold stone bench and opened her phone. A new message from John. "Don't wait up tonight. No apology, no tomorrow. Just an ending without words." She put the phone away and watched a few lost birds cross the cloudy sky. December rain had begun to fall over Seattle, and for the first time, she felt truly alone in the city she loved. That night, she wrote in her journal, "When a man stops speaking, the darkness begins to talk. It doesn't scream, it doesn't rage. It simply takes away small pieces of your heart, one by one." And she didn't know it yet, but from that silence, the next chapter of her life was already beginning. That morning, Seattle didn't rain. The sky was clear, sunlight slanted across rooftops, and dewdrops clung to the window glass, catching a dim, milky light. Holly woke with a strange feeling in the air, an uneasy, quiet, like the stillness before a storm. John was already sitting at the dining table, white shirt, loosened tie, the look of a man who hadn't slept all night. On the table, 2 cups of coffee, no breakfast. Holly walked closer, slowly, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. "You're not going to work?" she asked, voice soft but cautious. John looked at her, eyes sunken. "I need to talk to you." She sat down, fingers interlaced. The air in the kitchen was thick. Only the clock dared to speak. "Vanessa and I." He paused, searching for words. "We have something." She didn't ask what something meant, because every woman knows when her husband says that, it's already gone too far. She only took a long, steady breath. "How long?" He lowered his head. "A few months." "A few months," she repeated evenly. "While you still came home, ate the meals I cooked, slept in our bed." He looked up, guilt and justification blending in his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but she makes me feel light." Holly gave a faint, bitter smile. "Light because she doesn't love you enough to ask for anything?" John fell silent. The room was bright with sunlight, but Holly felt like she was in darkness. She wanted to scream, throw something, and ask how he could betray someone who had completely believed in him. But in the end, all that came out was a single, quiet question. "What do you want now?" He exhaled, his tone frighteningly calm. "I want both." Holly stared at him, unable to believe she'd heard right. "What did you just say?" "I don't want a divorce. You're the steady part of me. And she," he hesitated, "she's the part that makes me feel young, alive." She gave a small, cold laugh that made him flinch. "And you think I'll accept that?" "I thought you'd understand. You always understand me better than anyone." "No, John. I understand you, but that doesn't mean I'll stay when you cheapen what love means." He stood, trying to sound composed. "Holly, don't make this dramatic. Please don't turn it into a tragedy. I'll still take care of you. You'll still have everything. Don't leave." She rose too, eyes locked on his. "You're afraid of me leaving because you can't stand to lose your image of being a decent man, right?" He turned away, silent. The moment stretched, raw and endless. Then she said quietly, each word like a stone falling, "You can keep her, John, but you can't keep me." He gave a short, arrogant laugh. "You won't leave. You couldn't last a week without me." She looked at him, not angry, just profoundly sad, the kind of sadness too deep for tears. "You're wrong," she said, her voice like a farewell. "It's because I once believed I couldn't live without you, that today I have to prove I can." She turned and went upstairs, closing the door behind her. John sat there, listening to her footsteps fade, feeling hollow. He believed she was just angry that she'd cool down, as always. But upstairs, Holly Anna Carter stood before the mirror, staring at herself. The woman in the reflection was no longer the girl from the Seattle greenhouse. smiling at love as if it were unbreakable. This was someone else, eyes clear, wet, but resolute. She took a deep breath and began to pack. By noon, light rain began to fall over Seattle. Holly opened the closet and pulled out her old college suitcase. She folded her clothes carefully, as though tucking away memories. The wedding ring was removed and placed on the bedside table. Bank card left behind. House key tied with a white ribbon. Set beside a letter she wrote, "John, I'm not taking anything of yours, because I owe you nothing, and you no longer hold anything of mine. Live the way you want. I'll live the way I need to." She placed the letter on the kitchen counter, beside the cup of cold coffee. Rain tapped softly against the glass, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat counting down. Before leaving, she stood by the doorway, looking around the house that had once been their world. Every corner, every object whispered memories, laughter, Thursday dinners, the sunrise photo on the wall. But instead of crying, she smiled, because finally, she understood. Real love never holds someone through pity. She rolled her suitcase across the floor. The wheels echoed like the last sigh of a love ending. She paused at the doorstep and set the key ring down on the stone floor. The metallic clink was slight, but it carried far, like the sound of a period at the end of a long sentence. She called a taxi. The driver looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" "Capitol Hill." "That's pretty far and it's raining." "That's okay," she said softly. "I need to go farther than the rain." The car pulled away. Through the window, the house faded, dissolving into the misty drizzle. She leaned back, closed her eyes. The first tear slid down her cheek, not for losing him, but for finally choosing herself. Across the city, John was still sitting in his office, not reading the letter on the table. He thought she'd call in a few hours. He was sure she'd come back, like every other time. But as night fell, the house stayed silent. No texts, no calls. He opened the closet. Her clothes were gone. The suitcase is missing. Only then did he realize she wasn't bluffing. He picked up the key ring from the cold stone floor. The ribbon twisted like his own thoughts. A cold wind swept through, snuffing out the light in the living room. And for the first time in years, John Baker felt loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes when you realize you've driven away the one person who truly loved you. The rain was still falling when the taxi stopped outside Aunt Marissa's house on Capitol Hill. Her aunt opened the door, gray sweater, silver hair, a smile soft as time itself. "You're home, aren't you, Holly?" Holly nodded. "Come in, sweetheart." Those simple words were the first warmth she had felt after the storm. She stepped inside. The door closed gently behind her. But the sound was not an ending. It was the quiet opening of a brand new chapter. A chapter where she didn't yet know where she was going, or what she would do. Only that, at last, she still had herself. The morning after she left, Seattle felt colder than usual. Last night's rain had left water streaks running down the road toward Capitol Hill. The taxi stopped in front of a small wooden house with a moss-covered white fence, the home where Aunt Marissa had lived for over 30 years. The door opened before Holly could even knock. "My goodness, look at you." Her aunt's voice was soft, but carried a trace of heartbreak. She pulled Holly inside, set down the old suitcase, and wrapped her in a tight embrace. No questions. No, what happened? Just the arms of someone who understood that sometimes silence is the first form of healing. The little house smelled of cinnamon and baked apples. A warm yellow light spilled from an old lamp onto the worn wool rug. Holly sat down, hands wrapped around the cup of hot tea her aunt had made, eyes wandering to the garden where roses still held dewdrops. "I knew you'd come back one day," Aunt Marissa said slowly. "Why's that?" "Because no one can live forever in a place where their heart no longer belongs." The words stung, and Holly blinked away the burn in her eyes. She managed a small smile. "I thought I was stronger." "No, sweetheart. You just loved deeply. That's not weakness." They sat quietly for a long time. Outside, the rain tapped softly on the tin roof, steady as a heartbeat. In the days that followed, Holly settled into the slow rhythm of the old house. She woke early, gathered fallen leaves, and watered the garden. In the afternoons, she read beside her aunt. At night, they sipped chamomile tea and listened to the wind hum through the trees. She no longer cried, Only once in a while did her fingers brush the bare spot on her hand where the ring used to be. One evening, Aunt Marissa brought her an old wooden box. "This was your grandmother's," she said. "She left it for you. I kept it, knowing you'd need it someday." Inside were faded photographs and a small brown leather journal. On the first page, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "If you forget your worth one day, look at how you've loved others and love yourself at least that much." Holly closed the journal and held it to her chest. Outside the window, Seattle was raining again. She remembered the sound of the keys falling onto the stone that night. A slight sound, but one that tore through every memory. Thinking back, she realized it wasn't just an ending but a beginning. The next morning, she cleaned the attic room, set up a small desk by the window, and placed her camera on it. She photographed the quiet things around her: rose petals, her aunt's hands pouring tea, sunlight slipping through leaves. Each image was a breath, a way of telling herself, "I'm still here, still alive, even alone." One afternoon, while Holly was sorting the photos, her aunt stepped in and asked, "What will you do with all these pictures?" Holly smiled. "I don't know yet, but when I take them, I feel at peace." Her aunt nodded. "Peace is where all good things begin. Don't rush it." The words planted a small seed inside her. She didn't yet know where she was headed, only that she was no longer standing still in the dark. That night, before bed, she wrote in her journal, "Sometimes, freedom doesn't come from walking away from someone, but from the moment you stop trying to prove to them that you're worth staying for." While Holly was learning how to breathe again, across the city, John Baker was learning what emptiness felt like. When he came downstairs in the mornings, he'd see the second coffee cup still on the shelf, the one she used daily. Her embroidered H-towel still hung over the chair. Everything in the house looked the same, except it no longer felt alive. He opened a drawer and found the letter. Her handwriting was gentle, yet unwavering. When he reached the line, "I owe you nothing," his chest tightened. For the first time, he didn't know what to do. He tried calling her, but the number was blocked. He drove to Capitol Hill, stood outside Aunt Marissa's gate, but didn't knock. He just stood there, watching the warm light through the window, hearing faint old music play inside, knowing she was there peaceful, without him. When he returned home, the house was silent as a tomb. Even his company began to crumble, contracts delayed, stocks dropped, partners lost faith. He signed papers incorrectly and missed meetings. His father's voice thundered, "I warned you. A baker can't afford weakness. And now look, you've lost everything." John didn't answer, because his father was right, except that the thing he'd truly lost wasn't on any balance sheet. Meanwhile, Holly began to feel the quiet strength that comes from peace. She took morning walks around the neighborhood, capturing the smiles of strangers. One day, a little boy selling flowers handed her a sunflower. "Why give this to me?" she asked. He grinned. "Because you look like someone who needs reminding that the sun still rises daily." She laughed for the first time in weeks. Soon, she started posting her photos online. Unexpectedly, they spread quickly. One comment read, "I see myself in this woman's eyes, sad, but unbroken." Holly read each word, feeling warmth return to her heart. One afternoon at the local market, she noticed a small stall selling beads and copper wire. She bought a few, went home, and began weaving them into bracelets. When she slipped one onto her wrist, she realized it wasn't just pretty. It felt like holding together the fragments of her own soul. She made a few more, naming each: rebirth, forgiveness, freedom. When Aunt Marissa saw them, she said, "You should sell these, not for the money, but because maybe they'll heal someone else the way they're healing you." Holly smiled. "I haven't thought about that." "Well, think about it," her aunt said. "True beauty is born from pain that's been forgiven." Holly nodded, taking the words to heart. She didn't know it yet, but that small idea would become the spark that started her new journey. She sat by the window that night, watching rain slide down the glass. The future ahead was still hazy, but she wasn't afraid for the first time in a long time, because she knew she had left at precisely the right moment, when her heart was still whole enough to begin again. The morning after Holly left, John Baker woke in a house that suddenly felt too large. Grey light slipped through the thick curtains, casting long, cold shadows across the room. He lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his head aching from whiskey and from thoughts he couldn't name. Everything looked the same as yesterday, the polished kitchen, the leather sofa, the soft jazz humming from the speakers, except for one thing. The sound of someone living there was gone. He glanced toward the dining table and saw her letter. At first, he didn't plan to read it. Pride stopped him. Fear stopped him more. But his eyes wouldn't move from the envelope, her familiar, gentle handwriting staring back. He opened it. 4 lines, nothing more. I'm not taking anything of yours, because I owe you nothing, and you no longer hold anything of mine. Live the way you want. I'll live the way I need to. 4 lines, yet every word cut deep. John folded the letter, set it down, and told himself she'd be back. She always came back. Holly couldn't live without him. He picked up his phone and called her number. The number you have dialed is not available. He tried again, same result. He smirked bitterly and tossed the phone onto the couch. Fine. You want silence? I'll give you silence. But one day later, that silence stopped feeling like control and started feeling like collapse. By noon, the first cracks appeared. A call came from the bank. Mr. Baker, we need Mrs. Holly Anna Baker's signature before proceeding with this transaction. What signature? I'm the account holder. Yes, sir. But according to the trust agreement, all disbursements require dual authorization. He frowned. That's ridiculous. I'm the CEO. I control everything. Operationally, yes, the banker replied. But all major assets and liquid funds remain in joint ownership with your wife. The words hit like a hammer. Within hours, every transaction halted. Projects stalled. Accounts froze. He rushed to the office, face pale. His assistant hurried beside him. Sir, Tokyo investors just pulled out. Zurich is requesting asset verification. John slammed his fist onto the desk. Who gave them reason to doubt me? Rumors, sir. About Mrs. Baker resigning from the Baker Foundation board. It's spreading. He stared blankly at the screen as a notification popped up. Transaction declined. Authorization required from Holly Anna Baker. That was when he realized. Everything he called his empire had been built on the steadiness of the woman he'd dismissed. By late afternoon, his father called. The older man's voice was sharp as steel. What the hell have you done? All family assets are frozen. I warned you about the dual ownership clause. I'll fix it, John muttered. Fix it? How? She's gone. If she doesn't sign, we lose liquidity. Do you understand? John said nothing. On the other end, William Baker's tone turned cold. You haven't just lost a woman, son. You've dismantled a dynasty. When the call ended, John sank into his chair. Sunlight hit his trembling hands, and he remembered her words the day she left. I choose dignity over comfort. He'd laughed at the time. Now he understood she truly could live without him. He wasn't sure he could say the same. 2 days later, John drove to Capitol Hill. Drizzle fell over the city, turning the yellow leaves slick on the pavement. He stopped before Aunt Marissa's little house roses blooming faintly in the rain. Through the window, he saw Holly making tea. A grey sweater, hair tied loosely, the warm glow of a lamp softening her calm face. She didn't look like a woman broken. She looked like someone who'd finally found peace. He almost went to the door but froze. She was smiling. A quiet, serene smile not meant for anyone, not even him. And he knew, if he knocked, she would open the door. But she would never be his again. He turned back to his car. That night, he opened a bottle of wine. Vanessa called. Are you okay? The media's talking about the company's instability. I'm fine, he said flatly. I could help if you'd make my position official. John laughed bitterly. The only role you've ever had is the one that ruined everything. There was a pause. Then her voice cooled. I guess I was wrong to think you were different from them. She hung up. John threw the glass against the floor. The shatter echoed through the empty house like an accusation. He wandered the hallway, fingers brushing the framed photos. Their wedding day, the lakeside, her laughing in the kitchen. In every photo, her eyes held the same thing, a look that said, "You are my world." And he had destroyed that look. The next morning, his lawyer came by. John, to unlock the accounts, you need her signature. There's no other way. There must be something transfer. Lawsuit? No. You both signed a perpetual co-ownership clause. If you sue, you'll lose everything. Public trust-wise, your only option is to talk to her. Talk to her. 2 simple words that now felt impossible. He let out a dry laugh. I talked too much when I shouldn't have and said nothing when I should have. What's left to say? Emergency meetings followed. Employees avoided his gaze. Headlines swarmed. John Baker's empire on the brink, the CEO who lost everything when his wife walked away. That night, he drove aimlessly through Seattle. Rain poured harder, city lights blurring on the windshield. He stopped by the lake where they'd taken their wedding photos. Sitting in the car, he whispered to the wind, "Holly, you took everything from me." Then softer, "No, I gave it away long before you left." Across the city, Holly knew nothing of his unraveling. That day, she spent her morning photographing Aunt Marissa trimming roses. She posted one picture online with the caption, "People think loss is an ending, but sometimes it's the only way to begin again." The image spread quickly. Thousands shared it. A local magazine asked to interview her for an article on women and the art of healing. Holly hesitated. "I'm not sure I have anything worth saying." Aunt Marissa smiled. "Just tell the truth. Your story might be the light someone else is searching for." That night, Holly sat at her desk and began to write. "I once believed love was everything. Self-respect is the part you can never lose, because once you do, you have nothing to love anyone with." Outside, rain whispered against the window. She set her pen down, breathing out slowly. Then she smiled, not toward the past, but toward herself. Spring returned to Seattle quiet, like time's way of saying "I'm sorry." On the hill of Capitol Hill, roses bloomed wildly in Aunt Marissa's garden, their scent drifting through Holly's open window. She woke earlier than usual, drew the curtains, and let the light spill in. It was the first morning she'd opened her eyes without feeling that sharp ache of missing someone. Holly brewed tea and sat at the small desk by the window. Her old camera, a few copper wires, and the semi-precious stones she'd bought from the local market lay on it. She turned one in her palm. Light flickered across the table, glimmering softly. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe she could turn these fragments into something beautiful, just like life itself shattered once, but still capable of shining. That day, she began, cutting wire, shaping loops, setting stones. At first, the pieces looked clumsy, uneven. She redid them, adjusting every small detail. Each motion steadied her, as if her hands were teaching her heart how to breathe again. That evening, Aunt Marissa walked in and saw the table full of wire and stones. "What are you making, dear?" "I don't know," Holly said with a small laugh. "It just calms me." Her aunt smiled. "Then keep doing it. Sometimes what saves us isn't something grand, it's just whatever our hands are busy creating." Holly chuckled. She made a few more pieces, then photographed them and posted them online with the caption, "I call them soul weave, souls woven back together." She didn't expect much, but within hours, the post spread everywhere. Messages poured in from women across the country, asking if she sold them, saying they could feel a story in each little piece. One wrote, "I went through a divorce, too. Looking at your bracelets makes me believe I can start over." Holly read every message, tears falling not from sadness, but from feeling understood. Day by day, she created more designs. She named each one after a stage of her own rebirth: forgiven, bloom, reborn, peace. Under each name, she wrote a short story. And soon, soul weave became more than jewelry, it became a language of healing. She used what little savings she had to open a small Etsy shop. The first night, she sold 3 pieces. Not much, but when the order confirmation pinged, she cried like she had just reclaimed a lost piece of faith. Aunt Marissa came over and held her shoulder. "See? Life never asked you to be strong at once, only to begin." The days that followed were filled with light. The soft clink of wire on the table, gentle music from the living room, and herbal tea scent filled the house. Holly no longer felt hollow. She was falling back in love with mornings, air, and herself. One afternoon, a stranger knocked on the door. A journalist from Seattle Women's Magazine. "We'd love to feature your brand, Soul Weave," she said. "People say your pieces have souls. Could you tell us how they began?" Holly paused, then smiled faintly. "Because I once fell apart. and I know what it feels like to want to piece yourself back together. Every creation is just me learning how to love myself again." The article came out weeks later. Her photo was on the cover, hair tied loosely, a gentle smile, her hands holding a bracelet that caught the light. The headline read, "The Woman Who Turned Pain into Art." Soon, all of Seattle knew her name, Holly Anna Carter. Work grew busier, but Holly kept her rituals. Morning walks around Fremont with her camera, afternoons crafting, evenings writing thank you notes to each customer. Aunt Marissa often teased, "You treat every bracelet like a child." Holly smiled. "That's because they are. They carry a piece of me wherever they go." One night, as she was wrapping orders, she received a message from a buyer. "Thank you. I wore your bracelet, reborn, today. And for the first time in 6 years, I applied for a job. I felt brave." She put her phone down and looked out the window. The Seattle sky was clear, with stars a rare sight after so many rainy nights. Her heart felt entirely at peace for the first time in nearly a year. A local craft shop downtown invited her to open a small display corner the following month. She arranged her jewelry beside her own photographs. At the opening, women came in buying, taking photos, hugging her, telling her, "You've told our story." Standing amid the warm lights and laughter, Holly felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not the return of who she once was, but the becoming of who she was meant to be: stronger, freer, radiant. That evening, Aunt Marissa took her out to celebrate at a cozy cafe. "You know," her aunt said over tea, "some people are born to endure pain and then use it to warm the world. You're one of them." Holly's eyes glistened. "I'm just trying to live kindly, Auntie." Her aunt smiled. "And that's enough. Kindness is the most beautiful form of happiness." Holly looked around the cafe. Couples laughing, golden lights, soft jazz in the background. A place that once would have made her ache now felt calm. She wasn't afraid of being alone anymore, because she'd learned, being alone isn't emptiness. It's what happens when you finally become full. That night, back home, she opened her grandmother's old journal. On the last page, in shaky handwriting, it read, "If you think you've lost everything one day, remember even ashes can grow flowers." Holly closed the book and smiled. She stepped onto the balcony, where the wind smelled of rain and roses. In the distance, Seattle's skyline shimmered with light. She took a deep breath. It felt like a rebirth. She didn't know that, across the city, John Baker sat alone in his dim office, reading the magazine that bore her picture. He touched the page, studying that smile for a long time. The woman in the photo was no longer his Holly. She was her own. And perhaps the most painful, most beautiful truth was that he was grateful she no longer needed him to shine. One early summer morning, Holly woke as she always did, early, calm. Seattle was rarely bright, but that day the sky was a pure, cloudless blue. Sunlight streamed through the curtains and spilled across her desk, where rows of soul-weave jewelry glimmered with a soft golden hue. She played music, brewed jasmine tea, and opened her laptop to answer customer emails. Among the dozens of orders and thank you notes, one message stood out. Subject line, "Invitation from Seattle today." They wanted her as a guest to talk about Soulweave and its message. Holly sat still for a long time, finger resting on the mouse, her heart thudding. She had never been on television. Her world used to be behind the camera, the quiet click of a shutter, not under studio lights and lenses pointed at her. But when Aunt Marissa heard the news, she said, "It's time, dear. Time to say aloud what your heart has been whispering all along." On the day of the recording, Holly chose a simple white dress and wore her reborn bracelet. Before stepping on stage, she took a deep breath and looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror had calm eyes, a gentle smile, and the quiet confidence of someone who had survived through a storm. The host began, "Today we welcome Holly Anna Carter, founder of Soulweave, a brand inspiring women everywhere to believe in themselves again." As the lights came up, Holly smiled. "What made you start this journey?" the host asked. Holly's voice was warm, deliberate. "I once thought happiness meant being loved, but I learned that true happiness is loving yourself when you lose everything. I didn't create Soulweave to sell bracelets. I created it to remind people that every crack can be rewoven, with self-respect and compassion. The studio went silent. Then the host leaned forward and whispered, "Thank you for saying what so many of us needed to hear." That evening, the episode aired. Within hours, social media lit up. Hashtags #SoulWeave Reborn. Holly Anna Carter trended across Twitter and Instagram. Women from everywhere, Seattle, Portland, New York, Dallas, posted photos of their bracelets, writing, "I'm learning to weave my soul back together too." Her online shop overflowed with orders. Reporters called her the symbol of rebirth. But what moved Holly most weren't the headlines, it was the private messages. "Because of you, I finally left after 10 years of abuse. You don't know it, but your story saved me from the darkest thought of my life." Tears filled her eyes as she read each one. Aunt Marissa, seeing her, just placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's how you know," she said softly, "that your pain had a purpose." A week later, the Seattle Times ran a 3-page feature titled, "Holly Anna Carter, the woman who left a billionaire and built an empire from pain." It told her story from an unknown photographer, a betrayed wife, to the founder of a movement inspiring thousands. The final line read, "She didn't build an empire with money, but with truth and courage, and that's the kind that lasts." Holly smiled when she finished reading. She knew John would see it too, but for the first time, the thought didn't hurt. Only gratitude remained, because if not for that heartbreak, she would never have become the woman she is now. In the months that followed, Holly's life changed completely. SoulWeave Studio in Fremont expanded. She hired 3 women, all of them survivors of loss or betrayal. She taught them how to craft jewelry, photograph it, and write each product description, not with marketing, but with heart. One morning, as they shared coffee and warm bread, a young employee said softly, "Miss Holly, I never thought I'd laugh at work again. Thank you." Holly looked around at their faces glowing in the morning light. "I didn't do much," she said. "I just believe no one is born to stay broken." A major fashion brand from Los Angeles soon approached her for a collaboration, SoulWeave X Bloom. She agreed, but only with one condition. Creative control would remain hers. "You can sell the pieces," she told them, "but don't touch the message. That's the soul of it." The brand spread nationwide. Her talks were hosted in universities, women's forums, and community centers. Each time she stepped on stage and saw the faces watching her, her heart trembled not with fear, but joy. After one talk in Tacoma, an older woman approached her, eyes full of tears. "My dear, I'm 70 now. I divorced at 40. But today, listening to you, I feel like I've finally forgiven myself." Holly hugged her. "I only shared my story." The woman smiled. "Yes, but you told it with your heart, and that's what the world's been missing." That night, those words stayed with her. She wrote in her journal, "When we tell the truth, even the painful someone will always listen. Because courage has a voice of its own." Months later, she was invited to speak at a national women's entrepreneurship conference in Chicago. Standing before 2,000 people, under the bright stage lights, she began, "I didn't come here to teach success. I came to say this: if you're broken today, remember that's not the end. Sometimes, God breaks us open so that light can get in." The room went silent. Then everyone stood, applauding not just her words, but the truth behind them. At that moment, Holly knew she was no longer the woman defined by her pain. She had become part of something greater, a quiet awakening of self-worth in countless hearts. That same night, across town in a small bar by Lake Washington, John Baker sat alone, watching the video of her speech on his phone. The light from the screen flickered across his tired face, his hair streaked with gray that hadn't been there before. He listened to her voice say, "If someone breaks you, don't hate them. Thank them because they forced you to find your own strength." John turned off the video and sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you, Holly, for helping me understand that." Outside, Seattle's rain began to fall again. Soft, endless, mingling with the tears he didn't bother to hide. Autumn came early to Seattle that year. The wind carried the scent of rain and wet leaves, giving each morning a quiet sadness, the kind that's somehow beautiful. On Capitol Hill, Aunt Marissa's little house glowed gold in the slanting light. Holly could see the whole city from her second-floor window, the skyline, and Lake Washington's distant shimmer. She woke early, opened the windows, and let the light pour in. Every morning, she wrote a few lines before starting work. Not for anyone else, just as a reminder that she was alive, whole, and real. I once thought some people only belonged to someone else. Now I know sometimes we must belong to our own life first. On her desk, the soul weave bracelet sparkled in the sunlight. She had just finished an order for an international women's conference in San Francisco. The work was busy, but it made her happy. Each piece she sent out was another story told. That afternoon, she received a call from Forbes Women. They wanted her to attend their Women Who Inspire gala to speak about her journey of rebirth. Holly paused, smiling. "There was a time I was terrified of standing on a stage," she said softly, "but maybe now I'm ready." When she hung up, Aunt Marissa looked at her from the kitchen doorway. "You're about to speak to the world, right?" "Yes," Holly said. "But I'm not speaking to be heard. I'm speaking so someone out there feels a little less lost." "Then speak," her aunt said, "with your own voice." In the days that followed, Holly prepared for the event, then decided not to write a script. She would speak from the heart, the way she'd always lived. On the morning of the gala, she wore a simple black dress, her hair swept up, and a pair of soul-weave earrings, her own creation. She took a deep breath when the car stopped in front of the conference hall. Photographers' flashes blinked. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's Holly Anna Carter, the woman who turned heartbreak into an empire." Inside, hundreds of guests filled the hall. As the host introduced her, the stage lights flared. Holly stepped forward, calm, graceful, steady. "How many of you," she began, "have ever thought you couldn't get back up after being hurt?" Hands rose across the room. She smiled. "I once thought that too, but I learned no one stays broken forever. Sometimes, all we need is one reason to stand again. And sometimes, that reason is ourselves." Applause rippled through the hall. She spoke about soul-weave, learning to believe again, and finding meaning in pain. And she ended with a sentence that silenced the room. "If you're standing in the ruins today, believe me, one day you'll thank the storm that passed through, because it taught you how to rebuild your home from ashes." When she stepped off stage, the audience rose to their feet, hundreds of eyes following her, and for a brief, inexplicable moment, she felt as though someone out there somewhere was watching too. That same evening, across town, John Baker sat alone in the house that used to be home. The light above the table was dim, the air still. A dusty wedding photo leaned in its frame. He'd just finished watching the Forbes gala on television. Holly's image filled the screen, her calm eyes, her serene smile, the warmth in her voice. The host had called her the most inspiring woman of the year. He stared, unblinking. His fingers tightened around his glass, then released. He remembered her voice years ago. "You're afraid of me leaving because you can't bear to lose the image of being a good man." Now she was gone, and that image had disappeared with her. After she left, his company collapsed. Projects failed, investors withdrew, and shareholders turned on him. Headlines read, "Baker Empire falters amid personal and leadership scandal." He had once been known as the man who never lost. Now he was a cautionary tale. Vanessa was long gone, taking with her a few company secrets. His father had suffered a stroke, silent, motionless in his hospital bed. John visited weekly, sitting beside him in wordless guilt. For the first time, he felt small and empty in a way no success could fill. One afternoon, driving through Fremont, he saw it, a white and gold sign, Soul Weave Studio. Through the glass, Holly stood laughing, surrounded by young women. She wore a light-colored dress, the sun catching her hair until it seemed to glow. John stopped the car and sat there, watching. Then, for a single second, she turned her gaze, accidentally meeting his. They saw each other. She gave a faint nod. No anger, no distance, just a quiet greeting between two people who had once loved deeply. He smiled back, barely, and drove away. He kept the radio off all the way home, lost in thought. She had forgiven him not with words, but with how she lived. That night, he sat at his old desk and typed, "Dear Holly, I don't expect you to come back. I want you to know you were right. You were the foundation, the breath, the proof that I could be decent. And when you left, I finally understood what emptiness truly means. Thank you for teaching me that lesson, even if the cost was everything." He didn't send it. He left it in drafts, a silent kind of closure. Outside, rain began to fall again. He stepped onto the balcony, staring at the faint lights up on Capitol Hill. Somewhere out there, she was sleeping peacefully, and he was still awake, not out of regret, but because, for the first time, he understood what it meant to want to be worthy of someone, even if she no longer belonged to him. That same night, Holly woke briefly and stepped onto her balcony. The air was still. The city lights shimmered below the hill. She whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for once being part of me, and for letting me go." And beneath the Seattle sky, two souls once entwined in love and mistakes looked toward the same horizon, from two different worlds. No bitterness, no holding on, only the calm understanding that love doesn't always mean keeping someone close. Sometimes it means letting them be who they were always meant to become. 3 years had passed since Holly walked out of the Baker house. Time hadn't erased her memories, it had only softened them, like scars that no longer ached when touched. She no longer measured life in months of pain, but in projects completed, photographs taken, and the women who came and left her studio with eyes that shone a little brighter. Soulweave had become a national brand. Holly traveled across the US for talks and exhibitions, but kept her quiet Seattle rhythm, jasmine tea at dawn, tending to her flowers, photographing sunlight spilling through the window. Sometimes she remembered the rainy nights of her past not with regret, but with a tender smile. That October, she received an invitation from the Institute of Future Design, a major conference themed "The Architecture of Resilience." They wanted her to speak on the design of emotion, how humans can rebuild themselves after breaking. She agreed. She didn't know that another name on the speakers list was John Baker. When the organizer sent the schedule, she paused at his name. Her heart skipped not from fear, but from the strange familiarity of a memory that no longer hurt. She smiled to herself. So fate still has a sense of humor. On the conference day, Seattle was gray and misty, the rain that looked like breath. Holly arrived early, wrapped in a beige coat, her hair tied neatly, and her posture was calm and sure. The hall shimmered with light. The air buzzed with conversation and the soft echo of footsteps. John arrived half an hour later. 3 years had aged him gently gray, threaded through his hair. Faint lines marked his face. The arrogance was gone from his eyes. In its place was quiet, humility. He was no longer the titan of finance, but the founder of a non-profit that helped young people start over. After his empire collapsed, he disappeared from the business world almost like atonement. When he saw Holly across the lobby, he stopped. She was laughing with a small group, poised and radiant. No bitterness, no armor, just peace. He realized, with a pang, that what he'd loved most about her was this very thing. The way she could soften an entire room just by being in it. They crossed paths in the hallway. Their eyes met. He smiled faintly. "Hi." "Hi, John." Her voice was calm, unshaken. "It's been a while." 3 years, she said, "but it feels like a lifetime." A pause. He asked, "How are you?" "I'm well. Peaceful. And you?" "I'm still learning how to be better." She nodded. "Learning is living, then. You're still alive." He chuckled softly. "For the first time, I think I finally understand that." They parted with a simple nod. No promises, no lingering. Just two grown people who knew that sometimes meeting again and smiling was rare enough to count as grace. That afternoon, the conference began in a glass-walled hall overlooking Lake Washington. The Seattle light was pale, almost silver. Rain drifted outside like mist. John spoke first. His topic, the architecture of mistakes. He talked about arrogance, the collapse of his empire, and the lessons hidden in failure. "Sometimes," he said, "the price of success is losing your soul. And only after I lost mine did I realize how priceless it was." The room fell silent. He ended with a line that made the audience hold their breath. "If you've ever driven someone away, be grateful. They allowed you to see the worst in yourself and change it." From the fourth row, Holly lowered her eyes. He didn't need to say her name. She knew, and in that moment, she understood. Forgiveness doesn't require an apology. It happens the moment you stop wishing the past had gone differently. She stepped onto the stage when her turn came as music played softly. "We often think brokenness means the end," she began. "But if you look closely, it's the blueprint for something new. Like an old building that's fallen, the foundation is still there, waiting to be rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before." She paused, scanning the audience. "And perhaps the most important part isn't who hurt us, but who we become after we've walked through them." The hall erupted in applause. Amid the noise, their eyes met again, hers steady, his soft. No words needed. They both knew. This was the last page of their story. After the conference, he waited in the hallway. No longer the commanding figure he once was, but a man who had finally learned how to love through respect. "Can I say something?" he asked quietly. "You can. Thank you for leaving," she smiled. "And thank you for letting me go." They stood for a moment in silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through thin clouds, reflecting off the lake like liquid gold. "John," she said softly, "you know, our love wasn't wrong. It just never grew big enough to stop hurting." He nodded, eyes shining. "And maybe that's what made it real." Holly smiled, stepping back slightly. "Be well, John." "You too, Holly." She turned and walked away, sunlight catching her brown gold hair like a quiet halo. He stayed where he was, watching her disappear into the light, not reaching out, not calling her name. He only whispered to himself, "She was my spring once, and now she's the whole sky all her own." Seattle's December night was gentler than usual. No biting cold, just a soft chill and the faint scent of jasmine drifting from the garden of the Grand Harbor Hotel. The whole city shimmered, streets lined with lights, Christmas trees glowing, their reflections dancing across the lake like 1,000 fallen stars. Holly Anna Carter stepped out of the car in an ivory satin gown, and the flashes began instantly. The Women Who Inspire Gala, honoring the most influential women in America, was in full splendor, drawing hundreds of notable guests. And this year, she was the one being celebrated. The host introduced her. 3 years ago, she walked away from a marriage and lost everything. Today, she stands as a symbol of hope, strength, and rebirth. The entire hall rose in applause as she walked to the stage. Soft white light brushed her face, the same eyes as before, now calm, luminous, and impossibly sure. Holly smiled as she took the microphone. "Thank you for allowing me to share my story, not to relive the past, but to remind you that brokenness isn't the end. I once thought I had to be perfect to be loved, but I learned that I needed to be honest with myself." The room grew still. Her voice, low and steady, filled the silence. "I want to dedicate this to everyone who has fallen and believed they couldn't rise again. You don't need anyone to save you. You have to believe that there's still a small fire inside you, and one day, that flame will lead you out of the dark." Her voice caught slightly at the end. In the third row, Aunt Marissa wiped her tears, pride glimmering in her eyes. And farther back, a man sat silently in the dim light, John Baker. He hadn't come to be seen, only to see. His invitation came through the organizers not because of fame, but because he'd quietly funded the Reborn Foundation, the startup grant program Holly had founded. He wore a black suit, blending into the shadows, listening. When Holly finished, the hall erupted into applause. She bowed with a smile radiant as a candle in winter. Later, as the crowd mingled for dinner, John slipped out to the balcony. Cold air brushed his face. The lake glittered below. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note, the letter he had written 3 years ago but never sent. The edges had yellowed, the ink had blurred. He read it one last time, then smiled faintly. Just as he was leaving, a voice came from behind him. "I knew you'd come." Holly stood under the golden hallway light, her hair loose, her smile soft but distant. John turned, momentarily still. "I didn't think you'd notice." "I didn't have to look," she said. "I could just feel it." They stood in silence, the sound of music faint behind them. "Thank you for coming," she said gently. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "You should," she replied, "because some chapters deserve to end in light, not in darkness." He nodded slowly. "I have nothing left to justify, Holly. Only gratitude." She smiled. You've already said it by how you've lived. He gave a small laugh. I tried. Not for you to see. But I'd never again be the man who hurts someone like that. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of white flowers from the garden below. She looked toward the lake. The reflections of city lights danced in her eyes. John, she said softly, I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting. But it doesn't. It means remembering and not hurting anymore. He nodded, his voice low. I understand, and I want you to know I forgave you. Long ago, something unspoken broke and dissolved between them. Not sadness, not regret, but a quiet peace. Two people who had once loved, once wounded each other, now stood side by side, older, kinder, and free. John smiled faintly. I'm glad you're happy, and I'm glad you still believe in goodness. I do, he said, a little late. It's never too late to be decent, John. They looked at each other one last time. No hug, no handshake, just a look and a silence deep enough to mean everything. Holly turned and walked back inside, the golden light catching in her hair. He stayed, watching her go, not calling, not reaching out, just whispering to himself, she was my spring once, and now she's the whole sky her own, entirely. He unfolded the old letter, smiled again, and let it fall into the lake. The paper drifted, touched the water, and melted into the light, the same way he finally let her go. Inside, the host called Holly back to the stage for one last moment. She lifted her crystal award and spoke, her voice clear and steady. I want to thank those who once broke my heart, because through them, I learned how to rebuild myself. Applause filled the hall. Under the golden lights, her face glowed as though surrounded by 1,000 stars. And somewhere across the room, John Baker smiled too. Two people standing at opposite ends of the same space. Both were seeing, at last, the light they had helped each other find. And that, the narrator's voice closes, is the story of Holly Anna Carter, the woman who left a marriage and found an entirely new life instead. Maybe there's a part of her in all of us, the part that once loved wrong, lost everything, and thought we'd never rise again. But somehow did. Asterisk. If this story touched your heart, comment below. Tell me what pain you've endured, or write, I lived again. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories, where we'll listen, cry, laugh, and remember that love never ends. It just changes shape to teach us how to be stronger. This is your channel name, and you've been listening to Stories of America, where souls meet the light.